Welcome to the Tenant Screening Podcast, a training course for landlords to understand how to effectively find great renters. Sponsored by VeteranLandlord.com. And now your host, Edward O'Daniel.
Hello, landlords. Welcome to the Tenant Screening Podcast. I'm your host, Edward O'Daniel. This episode, we're going to be covering rental applications. Here in rental applications, one of the first things I want to kind of talk about are rental application fees. Now, there's a discussion in a lot of forums to say whether or not to charge rental application fees or not to charge rental application fees. I will simply tell you my opinion is absolutely you need to charge a rental application fee. Throughout several of the podcasts that we've talked about, we've heard that when processing rental applications, that you doing your own screenings will then need to go out and get background checks, credit checks, eviction, those type of things. Well, those cost money. So rather than you, the landlord, losing money on every application that gets submitted, it's only fair that the person filling out the application actually pays for that background check. And that's what the application fee is really for. Now, you can make the application fee for just what you need to cover your expenses on the reports, which depending upon what service you're using to generate those reports would cost. So I've seen them on the low end be as cheaply as $30 for a rental application fee. And I've even seen them as high as $100 for an application fee. So it really depends upon where you're at. I'll let you know mine are typically $50 for an application fee because that covers the cost of the report and it covers the cost of somebody to review that report. Could be you, could be a virtual assistant, or if you have anybody working with you, but it's just the cost of processing the application so that you're at least making something for your time. So it's up to you on how you want to charge for it, but definitely one of the first ways to sort of pre-screen an applicant is to charge an application fee. If they're not willing to pay an application fee, in my experience, they're not really going to be the type of person that you're looking for. If they want a free application fee, then they're going to want other things. They're going to want other concessions when they move in, and they're just going to be probably a lot of maintenance. So that's the first thing. It's just covering your your application fees. And not only do your application fees, specifically make sure that you put in there, application fees are non-refundable. Okay, so you want to make sure that if somebody applies, on a previous podcast, we talked about qualifications. You know, what kind of qualifications do the applicants need to have in order to qualify for your place? Well, if they don't meet those qualifications, you certainly don't want to feel obligated to have to give them money back because after you've run the reports and they don't qualify to, have to give them their money back. They should have looked at your qualifications in your marketing, either when you marketed the property or on your website, wherever that is. But the qualification should have been posted. They should have seen that, and they shouldn't have applied if they didn't qualify. That's my opinion. Again, you may feel differently, but this is about you. Create whatever plan that you want. Now, there's not a whole lot to filling out a rental application, but typically you would like to see it if you can do it as much electronically as possible. If you have to print out the applications and actually have somebody physically fill them out, that is always a possibility. That's a fallback. So if you're ever showing a property, one of the things you should definitely have on site, if you're got a vacant property and you're showing it to people, you should have copies of the application there for them to fill out. Because if they look at the property, look at your apartment or your home, whatever that is, and they're interested, you need to make sure that there's pens and applications right there that they could fill out and actually make a payment to you, give you money to cover the report so that you can process that right there on the spot so you can get started. Now, here's some of the information that you will need to get with your rental application. So some of the things is typically going to be a state driver's license that you're going to need to have so that you can keep track of that. Some people ask for a social security number card. Some people even go for 1 month, even 2 months worth of paycheck stubs to check for their job. So all of these things need to be collected and gathered at the time that the application is actually submitted, and you need to keep those on file. Now, and we'll go over why you need that here in just a little bit, but it really is for your protection, as you're going to see. one of the main things that you need to understand when you have an application, in order for you to use that application to submit to get credit background checks and so forth from third-party organizations, your application needs to have, typically it's called an agreement and authorization section. It's a little bit of verbiage at the bottom of your application, typically on page 2, maybe on page 3, that says the applicant is hereby giving the landlord, you, authorization to run background checks, and therefore they're allowing people to release information on their behalf to you, like whenever you want to do a landlord verification. We'll talk about that in another episode, but whenever you want to check your employment verification, again, that'll be another episode. But when you want to do all that, what type of an agreement do you actually need in order to get that information? So that's what this agreement and authorization section is for. So if you don't have that, you are going to run across problems whenever you're wanting to run a background check on somebody, because they're going to make you, if you don't have one of your own inside of your rental application, the third-party company is going to make you download their authorization form and submit their authorization form. You have to get that signed. You'll have to either meet with them again or either email it over to the applicants, get them to sign it and send it back. Really becomes a lot of time involved with that. So that's one of those things where you just have to come up with a good way of doing it. So just make sure that your application has that. You can find a solid application if you want on the veteranlandlord.com site inside of the document library area. Those are available for you there. Now, some of the other things that you actually want to use on your rental application are making sure not only does it have that section, but there's a couple of other pieces in there that you want to make sure that you get. And I'll tell you why here. You want to make sure that the emergency contact information is filled out, and you want to make sure that references are filled out. Now, the reason I say this is because having no emergency contact, excuse me, having no emergency contact and having no references means you only have a certain number of ways of contacting that person, like for instance, phone or email. If they give you a cell phone number and an email and you're trying to contact them and you can't, for whatever reason, let's just say that they're hurt. Let's just say they're in a hospital and you don't know it. They're not responding to their phone. They were in a car accident. Well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to pull up their rental application and find out their emergency contact? It could be a mom, a dad, a brother, sister, something like that. But having a number that you can actually call to find out what's going on with that person, to get some additional information, or in case that person's trying to dodge you, you can at least try to get to that person through other third parties. Now, having the emergency contact and having references really doesn't do any good unless you verify that during the application screening process. So as you're downloading the credit reports, looking at all those to make sure they process and pass all your qualifications, you need to make sure that the references you call the references. And if the reference says on there on the application says source, or what type of reference is it, like friend from work, or whatever that description is of the reference, don't tell them that. Make sure that when you call them, it's like, hey, I've got John applying for a place and he has listed you as a reference. Can you please tell me how you know John? And then that way they can tell you, oh, John's a friend of mine from work. And all that should do is just pretty much confirm the information that's on the application. Now, one thing about the application that I'm pretty strict on is making sure that you have accurate information. In a previous podcast, we talked about your qualifications, one of which is what we call automatic denials. So an automatic denial is also going to include any false information that's provided on an application. So if somebody gives you an application and they say they make $5,000 a month when they only make $2,000 a month, well, then that's false information. They're bloating themselves up to make themselves look better, and this is why you get paycheck stubs from them, so you can verify how much money that they make from these paycheck stubs, as well as do your own employment verification. So all of this just goes back to reinforce and verify that the information on their application is actually accurate. So if they have information on their application that is false, that should be an automatic denial. So if they're already lying on the application, then that's probably not somebody that you want to continue to do business with. So getting an application is pretty straightforward. The main parts you're going to run across problems with is how to get people to fill them out, because sometimes people will want to fill them out and then send them to you later. Maybe they showed the property and they don't want to fill them out right there on the spot. So they take an application with them to go. Well, now you're going to have to they're going to have to electronically scan or fax the application to you. Then there comes the method of how do they make the payment to you. Now, the nice thing is you can use Venmo and other like cash apps and things like that to transfer money around. So it is faster for them to transfer, but it just becomes a little bit more of a pain to gather the money that they need to pay for that application first. So you absolutely need to wait till they pay for that application before you start screening them, because nothing's worse than spending your $20 or $30 to screen them only to find out that they're not going to pass and that they already applied, they're not interested in your unit anymore, and they move on and they don't pay you for the money that you just spent. And now you're out money. That's the last thing you want to do. Now, another thing that's going to be a good cause about qualifications is dealing with rental applications, is making sure that any adult that lives in the unit has to fill out an application and has to go through the screening process. An adult is considered anybody that's 18 years or older. So even if they're a child, if they're just graduated high school and they're 18 or 19 and they want to move into your place, every adult, even though they're still a child, they're legally an adult. All adults need to fill out an application. They need to be screened, and all of the adults need to be put as financially responsible on the lease. Because right now, as a landlord, you want to make sure that you go after everybody that is on the lease if they owe you money. You want as many people as possible, and all the adults are people that you can go after. So those are just some good things that you can get as part of your application screening process. So the biggest thing is finding the application, getting it printed out, and just kind of getting into a groove of how you get that done. How do you have people pay you? How do they send that stuff back to you? Sometimes they can actually take pictures on their phone of the application, like page by page, and then through a computer you can put them together into like a PDF document afterwards. But obviously getting them to fill out the application while they're there viewing your house is probably going to be the best scenario. So that's all we have to talk about really with regards to rental applications. It's not a ton of information, but just having a good rental application that you can always just click file, open, print out a few copies, take them with you, knowing that everything is going to be there and you've got all your third parties and you know how to scan it and send it to people. That right there is really going to be a benefit to you. So hope you enjoyed this quick episode of the Tenant Screening Podcast. Please stay tuned for the next one, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Tenant Screening Podcast. To get your free copy of the Tenant Screening Handbook, visit us at veteranlandlord.com and create your free account. If you find this material valuable, we'd appreciate it if you can share this podcast with others and leave us a great review.